This episode of Between the Lines is brought to you in partnership with AXA XL Insurance. In a world that needs new energy solutions, AXA XL is facing into risk. As a leading global insurer, AXA XL partners with businesses, breaking down barriers to accelerate energy transition.
Welcome to Between the Lines, the podcast that dives deep into the stories redefining Asia-Pacific's reinsurance landscape. Recorded here in the newsroom of InsuranceAsia News in Hong Kong. I'm Andrew Mullen, Deputy Editor. This week we're mixing things up from our regular programming as we look back at last week's Singapore International Reinsurance Conference, more commonly known as SIRC. To do that, I'm joined by Editor-in-Chief Mithun Varkey, who's taking a break from hosting duties, having attended SIRC last week alongside Senior Correspondent Aidan Gregory and reporter Joana Nguyen. Mithun, as the experienced head having just attended SIRC for the fourth time, we'll kick off with you.
Thanks, Andrew. It's nice to be not having to host it. As you said, this is my fourth SIRC. The first one I went to was in 2022. It was the restart of the conferences after the pandemic. I mean, it was a big event, no doubt, but then the mood of the market and the conference was quite gloomy. I think, people were just coming back out from the pandemic. But also, I think the reinsurance market was in a very tough place at that point. They had a really prolonged soft market. And then just as the conference was about to kick off in 2022, there was a massive hurricane in the US. It was called Hurricane Ian. And that cost multiple billions of dollars of losses for the industry. And I think people coming into the conference were very pessimistic at that point. And in the next, in the next subsequent 2 years, we'd seen a massive hardening, reinsurers pulling back, as well as tightening terms and conditions, which has now led to a very profitable few years for the reinsurers. As we see I was looking at the 9-month results from some of the big global reinsurers, and they all seem to have CORs of, in the early 80%, which is fantastic results, and ROEs in the 20%. So that's been a fantastic result for reinsurers. So I think that the mood has changed, and this time there was a massive attendance, both in terms of people and in terms of countries represented. I think about 85 people from about 85 countries showed up for the SIRC. So, the mood's very different. We've gone through a hard cycle, and I think people are more positive. People are talking about growth, especially in Asia Pacific, and softening and easing of the tightened conditions. So all in all, I think it was a more positive vibe at the SIRC, and it was quite busy.
And Aidan, a first SIRC for you, but a second trip back to Singapore in a short space of time, having attended our cyber conference there. How was last week for you?
This was my first SIRC, and it was also my first major international industry conference since I started covering reinsurance just over a year ago. It was great to be back in Singapore so soon after our cyber event last month, and I really enjoyed SIRC, and the setting of Marina Bay Sands is spectacular for the event. It was also really nice to reconnect with market figures that I knew from my time in the London market, and also to meet many new people as well.
And Joana, a first SIRC for you also. How was it for you?
Right. So I got a chance to meet some of the people that I've been writing about, which was very exciting. I also gained a lot of hands-on experience in networking, like how to start a conversation with someone new or ask thoughtful questions and, of course, exchange business cards. So as a rookie journalist, this was all pretty new to me. And I was definitely nervous and shy in the beginning, but most people were actually very friendly and open to talking. And a special shout out to Mithun for providing guidance throughout the whole 4-day event and encouraging me to approach people outside my interview schedule on the sidelines of the conference. So overall, it was a very fantastic, wonderful experience for my growth as a journalist, and I really appreciated it.
So in terms of highlights, obviously, just if I may, from my side, I was office bound for the whole event, but I was editing all your stories and taking all the copy for the print edition and putting things on LinkedIn and putting things on the website. Must have been hundreds of stories, and just from my side, the speech from Patrick Chin and from Lloyd stood out as being a big move from last week and drew a lot of attention. Mithun, I know for you, pricing and capacity came out as kind of one of the big things from last week.
Yeah, I think the key points were pricing and capacity. That's what most of the conversations were about, surely, and that's certainly the big takeaway for all of us. There's no doubt the market is going through a softening cycle. Prices are coming down. off the record conversations, people were saying the pricing could come down by about 10 or 15% this time. So that's a substantial discount from where we were last year or the year before. I mean, we did see some softening last year already. So on top of that, so all of these reductions are on a risk-adjusted basis, obviously, but I think 10 to 15% rate reductions is what some of the people in the market are certainly expecting. I think one thing that certainly stands out is the additional capacity available in the market. We've all seen reports from brokers saying we are at record high reinsurance capacity globally. There's also record high cat bond issuances as well in the past year. So there's plenty of capacity available. This capacity going into all the different markets around the region in forms of new, existing markets deploying new capacity as well as new MGAs and new reinsurers forming in the region. So I think we will see an oversubscription at renewals, and that obviously would lead to a softening in rates. I think that's the big takeaway from the conference.
I think, Aidan, having spoken to you since you got back, you agreed that market softening is definitely on everyone's minds, but you had some other interesting angles that you got from last week.
Yeah, clearly, the market softening is very important, and, it dominated a lot of discussions at SIRC. It is particularly acute for property cat, given the very benign year for natural catastrophes that we've had around the world. But there were many other interesting topics to emerge from the discussions at SIRC. In particular, everyone's excited about the development of the cat bonds and ILS market in Asia Pacific. As Mithun says, 2025 has been a blowout year for catastrophe bond issuance, so it's broken all the records. And, and also we have seen the market in this region continue to develop. Hong Kong and Singapore have both overhauled their regulatory regimes for ILS in recent years. And there's a lot of hope and interest that the market will continue to grow in the region, heading into 2026, and that the strong momentum that we've seen in 2025 will continue for a long time yet.
And Joana, you already mentioned you went outside your comfort zone a little bit and spoke to a lot of different people. What's a few takeaways you can give us from some of those chats?
Yes. So besides on the talk about the soft market, some people told me that reinsurers still remained pretty bottom line focused. And in Asia in particular, premium growth is not the main focus for the reinsurers. One of the reasons for this is because demand for reinsurance in Asia is not as high as expected due to stagnant economic growth in mature markets like Japan, South Korea, and China. For emerging markets like Southeast Asia, national reinsurers tend to grow very cautiously and selectively because of the impacts of secondary perils, making their annual results not as good as global players. So despite the current softening conditions, analysts say that the prudency is still being maintained.
Mithun, for you've obviously had a lot of conversations as well, and there's been quite colourful language from one of your contacts last week.
Yeah, obviously, adding to what Joana was saying, I think the messaging from the brokers are very clear. They want reinsurers to cut prices and relax some of the terms and conditions and meet the demands of the cedants. But, that doesn't quite sit with the reinsurers. They want to talk about underwriting discipline and bottom line focus, and they don't want to go back to the old days of single digit ROEs. And some of the leaders of the reinsurance industry from the underwriting side of things were a bit worried, and you could see that. And I think one of the best lines I heard is that a very senior reinsurance executive told me that he's worried that we might be back on the way to the slaughterhouse of stupid reinsurance again. So that was quite a strong phrase coming in from some of the industry leaders. But certainly I think that there is a bit of concern around underwriting discipline. Obviously, as we said, the amount of capacity that's available in the market, we'd see some opportunistic reinsurers coming in and writing business that probably doesn't make much sense. And that's classic reinsurance cycle, I guess. But one thing that I just want to add is we talked about pricing, and reinsurers always talk about the insurance press's obsession with pricing, but there's also terms and conditions and structures. I think reinsurers are still trying to hold on to all the underwriting gains that they've made in the past 2 years, not relent too much. But I think market pressures will see some relaxation on terms and conditions and structures.
One reinsurance contact of mine described it as a Mexican standoff at the moment, heading into 1/1 renewals between reinsurers and brokers and their clients, which is quite interesting. Feels like it's going to go right down to the wire in terms of the negotiations ahead of the renewal period.
So there's definitely a lot more to come, and I'm sure we're going to be sticking with that as we move forward and keep unpacking things from last week. Sticking with you, Aidan, I've already touched on Patrick Tiernan's big speech, his first major speech in Asia as CEO of Lloyd's. You were in the room. What was the atmosphere like, and what did you glean from that speech?
Yes, I was in the room to hear Patrick Tiernan. This was as you say, this was his first major speech in Asia since becoming CEO of Lloyd's earlier this year. The room was pretty packed out, so there's clearly a lot of interest in hearing everything that Tiernan had to say. He spoke at length about, Lloyd's place in Asia and, the role that Lloyd's can play in terms of facilitating the market in the region. From what he said in his speech, it's very clear that, Asia remains a very, important market for Lloyd's, and the exchange's commitment to Singapore in particular remains very, very strong. Southeast Asia, in particular, with its dynamic emerging markets like Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia, is attracting loads of attention from global reinsurers as growth dries up elsewhere in the world, and Lloyd's wants to play a key role in facilitating that growth.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there was quite a lot of focus on Southeast Asia. Joanna mentioned earlier that there is concerns around economic growth in the more mature markets like Japan and Korea, and as well as in Australia in terms of, because of the consolidation in the market and the broader economic sentiments. So there is quite a lot of focus, as Patrick Tiernan mentioned, about, Lloyd's. As with Lloyd's, some of the other reinsurers are also really trying to grow their presence in Southeast Asia. I think Southeast Asia is a key theme across our conversations, as well as India. I think there's a lot of hope that there will be significant growth in reinsurance in India. And I think one of the key reasons I think there is such optimism around Southeast Asia is regulatory changes that's happening there. So there's quite a lot of focus from both brokers and reinsurers on serving that market. Indonesia is likely to go through a significant consolidation, for example, because of the changes in the minimum capital requirements. I think there's a lot of focus in Thailand. For example, one of the reinsurers was telling me that Thailand is a market that traditionally did not buy earthquake cover, but now suddenly after the events of, after the Myanmar earthquake in March, which affected Thailand and specifically Bangkok, there's going to be a lot more demand for earthquake capacity from Thailand, for example, and other markets, obviously Vietnam and Philippines, affected by cat losses. So that might see, there might be some changes in pricing and structures around Philippines and Vietnam this year. While it was broadly a benign year for cat losses around the region, I think Vietnam and Philippines stands out for the losses. So there's a lot of focus on regulatory changes and sort of demand in these Southeast Asian markets.
And I think that with all the regulatory changes as well as consolidations that are happening now in Asia, like in Indonesia or in Japan, there will be more need for bespoke tailored solutions, which are beyond conventional treaties. For example, Swiss Re told us that M&A related structured solutions are one of their core focuses. However, Munich Re, for instance, said that reinsurers should take into account the motivation of clients when using structured solutions. If the client's motivation is to achieve a certain objective, like helping their P&L or supporting the balance sheet, then reinsurers wouldn't be more open for discussions. However, if the motivation is not very clear, if it's to benefit the cycle and pass on the losses to the reinsurers, then obviously the reinsurers will not be interested. So I think that's very interesting.
Thanks, Joanna. That was really interesting. Moving on to another issue, which the industry's been speaking about for a long time, and the protection gap, and obviously couldn't be avoided last week. What was the discussions around that, and has it actually moved forward? Or are we in the same place that we've always been?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there is no conversation that doesn't mention protection gap. I think, by now we all know that we need to have every conversation that we have, we need to dedicate a few minutes to talk about the protection gap. Continues to be an issue in the region. But one of the things that really, I'm sure Aidan and Joanna might want to add more on that. But one of the things that really stood out for me, really interesting conversation that I had with Hitesh Kotak, who's the CEO for Munich Re for Southeast Asia and some of the other markets in the region. Hitesh had a very good point. He said, we've been talking about protection gap for a very long time, but nothing's changing. His view was that we need to look at new distribution models certainly from a primary insurance perspective. The fact is that in the US and Europe, where it's highly brokered, highly intermediated markets, those intermediaries don't work as well in most of the Asian markets, including a really mature market like Japan, right? So he said that we need a new agent model, which I thought was quite interesting, and that his take was that the products that we have right now is good enough. It's just that we need to sell the products better, sell the insurance product better, and you need more people on the street, and more agents, as he put it, more agents trying to sell the product and sort of educate the market better. And that's the only way we will solve the issue of the protection gap, which I thought was quite insightful.
Right. And one issue that is highly related to what you just said, Mithun, is the talent shortage. For example, Chris Townsend, who is the Allianz Management Board member, said in a speech at SIRC that the average age of those 150,000 people that work in the reinsurance industry is 46 years old. So we need to do more work, more marketing work in order to attract talents, not only in reinsurance, but also in the whole insurance industry in general. And of course, we need more feet on the streets to sell more insurance products as well. So I think this is a very important point that all the leaders in the insurance industry need to consider and take into account.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'm sure we're going to hear, as we always do, more on the protection gap going forward. I think we could sit here for ages going over all the topics and things that we had last week, but I think it's time to take a bit of a look forward. We've already had quite a few follow-up stories and stories coming out of SIRC on our website after the mountain of stories that were produced during the event. Just go around the table before we wrap up for today. What's the next thing you guys are going to be looking on, and what's the next story we can expect coming out from you? Mithun, do you want to take the first stab at that?
Sure. I mean, obviously we did produce quite a lot of stories in the last 1 week, but there were a lot more conversations that we've had, interviews that we had at the event. We'll see some of those stories coming out. I do have a few conversations with some of the brokers, like a really interesting conversation with Howden Re on their plans for the region. I hope to publish that very soon. I had a really good conversation with Swiss Re around their structured solutions offerings. Also Swiss Re about their new analytics product, which is a subscription-based product that they're bringing to the market. So there's quite a few stories around that will come from those conversations. And there was also some interesting scoops and exclusive stories that we are chasing up, leads that we've picked up from our conversations in the corridors of Marina Bay Sands that we hope to publish very soon.
And yeah, so from Mithun, we also had two stories from Aidan on the website today, so they're good ones to look out for. Aidan, you've had a story from Sompo already. What's next going to be coming from you?
So I have a couple of interviews that I still from SIRC that I still have to write up. One is I spoke with Sompo's head of energy for APAC, talking about the development of the renewables market in the region. I also sat down with the CEO of Malaysian Re, which is a very interesting conversation. So look out for that in the coming days.
Clearly no talent shortage around this table with the amount of stories we're going to be getting. And Joana, as the youngest member of our team, you're definitely keeping our average age down. What's the next thing we're going to expect from you?
Thank you, Andrew. So I spoke to Carl Beck, the Hartford's head of his Lloyd's Syndicate 1221. And so the Hartford opened their Singapore office 1 year ago, and they're approaching the 1 year anniversary soon. So he spoke to me about their continued effort to expand their specialty lines in Asia and in Singapore as well. So it's an interesting story to listen to all of his insights about the specialty markets, including the industry's focus and priority to expand into renewable energies, to cyber. So it's something we should look forward to. I think it's an interesting story.
That's great. A lot to look forward to going forward, but for us, that's it this week. This special edition of Between the Lines. We'll be back to our regular programming in 2 weeks with our usual news meeting and special guest. In the meantime, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Make sure you subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters delivered straight to your inboxes. And of course, we'd love to hear your feedback on the podcast and obviously anything else we're doing here. email us at editorial@insuranceasianews.com. I'm Andrew Mullen. Thanks for listening.